Everyone has a story, but what they do with that story speaks volumes about who they are. Leah Angel Daniel's story is one of obstacles and trying times as she navigated the foster care system in Western New York through the 80s and 90s. Her experiences make her story a document of the time period and the places in which she has lived. Leah is the author of I Shall Not Be Moved, My Extraordinary Journey from Trauma to Triumph, a book she has written so that her story can be a haven to those who have or are currently dealing with traumatic experiences. I was so happy to have Leah on the EPS podcast to investigate how her life story and her new book are both exceptional primary sources. All right, welcome back to the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source. I am Eric Paul, and I am very glad today to be joined by Leah Angel Daniel. And she is, well, you're a number of things. You're an author, you are a speaker, you are a media figure, you're also the founder of a organization that advocates for foster children. Is that correct?
Yes, Fostering Greatness, Inc.
All right. And it's out of Buffalo. On a personal interest, Leah and I actually attended school together. That's how we were on the same resident assistant staff at Oswego State University in central New York. And so we do have a connection. This was not one of those random, on a podcast, I need a guest kind of things. I've been following your everything from back, it seems like, when did you start doing the public speaking and coaching tours?
I've been doing that for a while. So I would say probably since 2010, just being more comfortable with doing the speaking. And as you know, when we were in college, I was involved in so many things and people would ask me to speak or be a part of something or do an interview with people that just came to our college to visit. So I've been doing this for a while. My background is in broadcasting and mass media. So it's something that I also love to do. And I feel like it's a life calling for me.
Do you feel like the time period in which you entered into that world, things have gotten, I know we were just saying before you hit record, it's gotten a little bit harder in some ways because we have so much access to information. You're always, this person texted that person, messaged, but as far as being able to be noticed, get those connections, go make a talk, because you just went down to New Orleans a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yes, I was in New Orleans for the Essence Fest. There's a book that we're going to talk about later on, but my publishing company actually had an authoress for women brunch where they honored us and we were able to reveal our book cover. So that was really good exposure for us down there during that time.
And so the book is I Shall Not Be Moved.
Yes, my extraordinary journey from trauma to triumph.
That's incredible. And so when you talk about the book cover, and it's a really pretty cover, I've talked to other authors before, and they mentioned a lot of times things like illustrations and book covers, they don't really have a lot of involvement with. They don't even have much input in it. Did you have much input in this one, or
yes,
did the artist just come up with it and say, what do you think?
No, I actually had a lot of input and for everything with my book. I actually do editing on the side. So a lot of publishing companies I do work with, but this particular publishing company called 13th and Joan is specifically for people of color, especially Black women, because a lot of times we don't get to do marketing that's needed in order for our publications and books and things of that sort. We don't get the due diligence that we need. So this particular publishing company focuses on that. So they asked me if I wanted to have my face on the cover and all of these different things. And I said, no, I want to have a lotus flower on the front. And these are my specific colors. And the reason why I chose the lotus flower is just based on this particular flower. It's beautiful when it grows. But if you think about where it is, sometimes is, an uncommon environment. And so that's how I look at myself, like growing into this beautiful being in person and just flourishing. Yeah. And despite the situations or things that I grew up around, I was still able to be my best.
So in other words, the publishing company really listens to its authors.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
everything is kept, seems a little bit tight in house. It's not,
Yes.
and that's by design, it sounds like, right? They don't want to get so big that, it's almost like I think about, I don't have insights into the publishing industry like you do, but like the movie Elf, where the dad is, and it just like, they produce these nice children's books, but then it's just guys in suits, and this like very corporate and very, but it sounds like the opposite here, where they really want to make sure that, to judge a book by its cover, right? You do want that in this case. That's great. Right. So, for those of you who are listening to this podcast for the very first time, what we do here is I have a template of questions. It's the same one as a history teacher that I use in my history classrooms or even my pop culture classrooms, where we take something, in this case, a book, and we go down through. I have a series of questions, and that produces a conversation. And it also tells us something about, in this case, a contemporary book. So the first question that I ask, and you've already touched on this a little bit, is what material is it made from, and or how is it made? So the book is coming out, right? It's still in that phase. How long has this book been on your mind?
Well, I've had the manuscript for many years. The book consists of basically my experience of growing up in the foster care system. Mm-hmm. And it evolved basically just as I evolved as a woman, thinking about the lessons and things that I've learned and what I've been able to utilize to teach or show others who are within the foster care system too. And so last year in 2021, my biological mother passed away.
I'm sorry.
And thank you. But at that moment, I just wanted to basically finish up the book because I just had so many thoughts and formulations just about my mother's life and what she shared with me. And that sometimes, people can only do what they, what they're, how can I say this? They can only do so much. A lot of times I wanted, different parents, and I wanted certain things. And I realized as an adult, and especially when my mom passed away, that she did the best she could with what she had, And so I'm grateful for what she could contribute, but also taking the things out of being in foster care. Those things were important to me too. But also when I spoke about being in foster care, a lot of times to my mother, it was a reminder that she failed as a parent.
I see.
So I didn't want to, keep reiterating that, even though I had gained so much while leaving the foster care system, but also went through some hard stretches too while being in the system itself.
So everybody has a story. I mean, that's what it really comes down to, is every single person you pass by on the street, that you see on, television or whatever, everybody has a story. And I can't think, let's go back to the book cover. I can't think of a better cover for it, because like a flower blooms, you're opening the book. And so that's the material of your book, is your own life, right? It's your life story, essentially.
Yes.
And so, I mean, that also answers the question how it was made. When it came to finding the right publisher for this book, did you go through a number of different options, or did you know exactly the direction you wanted to go?
Well, I had been following this particular publishing company for a while. And I knew that I had this manuscript already, but I knew I needed some extra assistance with pulling more out of the story. So, how they have beta readers and different things like that for people who don't know you at all. And they read the story and they say, okay, well, I wanted to know more in this area, or bringing more out about that. So I knew that I needed some assistance in that area for me to really get the story out. And it was very emotional. Yeah. There were trauma triggers, with writing this story, because I had to go back to some of the things that I experienced while being in foster care, and some of the, the hurt and the heartaches and the disappointments that I experienced, but also some of the things that I gained and some of the successes that were there. So it was really like an emotional journey, and I needed somebody to assist me through that so that I didn't get lost in the emotions with just trying to finish this book. And it's needed. There are a lot of young people who are within the foster care system who really don't see success stories or see people that look like them, which are people of color. And to have access to them and to say, okay, we may not have the same experience, but we have a shared experience of being in the foster care system, of seeing all of these negative statistics saying that, we don't make it once we leave, but you did. So how did you do it? So that I can, learn or have a pathway to follow, after I leave this particular system.
I was going to ask about that. I mean, when it comes to an editor or a reader looking at your manuscript, was it hard sometimes when they asked you to provide more? Like you didn't intentionally want to, but you're saying it was a very emotional thing. It was maybe something that, did you appreciate it afterwards though, that they wanted to hear more of some of the triggering type feelings?
Yes, as a writer, I appreciated the process, but as a human being, a lot of those things, again, they were trauma triggers, because sometimes I'll be like, man, that's just messed up what I went through. Like that is just so wrong. And it just, the thought process that I was going through, like I went through a lot. Like, how did this young Afro-Latina girl just go through all of this and still make it? Like, oh my goodness. And just looking back and just seeing what I had to go through, it was a lot. It was a lot.
What do you attribute that to? Would you say that it was, because in the midst of it, did you ever feel hopeless? Did you ever feel this is too much for a kid my age? What do you think got you through it?
Truly, Eric, I just think sometimes it was the grace of God. I am a spiritual person, because there's sometimes when I think about like situations that I was going through and I felt like I was walking through the twilight zone, and I'm like, what was pushing me? What was pushing me forward? And then I would have to say, my support system of friends, in college, all of you guys were very supportive, and many of you may not have known the specific things that I was going through, but just the guidance and always reinforcing my strengths, that was very helpful for me, because a lot of times I was reminded while being in the foster care system of what I wasn't doing right, and reminded of what type of family I came from, or to be ashamed of those things, or, all of these different negative things where you think of this particular system that's supposed to set you up for success, that people would treat you different, but they didn't. So I had to really figure out what was my path going to be? Who was I going to surround myself with that was going to help me to become my best? And that's what I did.
One of the things that I think about frequently is, especially I'd say in the last 40 or 50 years, is the changing definition of family. I think it's so much more possible. There's a lot of bad things that come with social media and the internet, but there's a lot of good things too, that you can surround yourself with the people, like you said, of your choice. And just because it's not people filling the exact family tree spots, it doesn't mean that they don't have family type connections. And so it's a story that seems to show up a lot of times in media, sometimes under the radar. I even think of like a program in the 1980s and early 90s, the Golden Girls, which shows a different kind of family. Only two of the people in that household are related, and mother and daughter, and then the other two are friends, but they act like a family. And so it's something that benefits us in some ways, that we are able to treat each other like family. Somebody in your situation growing up got to see that in a couple of different ways, right? Because you were either placed into a different household, and then you still kept contact with your biological mother as you went through the system. So you had almost multiple families, it seemed, growing up. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes. Yep.
So the next, and we know who made it. You made it, so I don't need to talk about that. But what was the makers? What was or is in this case the makers' status or role in society? You're a great many things.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I really like is that you are using the term alumni instead of former foster child.
Yeah.
What brought you to that? I think that's great because a lot of times we think of alumni as just being like you and I are alumni of Oswego State, somebody who graduated from a school. But what change? What's behind the changing of the language when it comes to foster children?
Well, a lot of people will say, "Oh, are you a former foster care youth?" And I'm like, "I'm grown as ever. I am not a youth." And sometimes I felt like when people would say that, they were trying to, depreciate the value of being in that particular type of system. Like, oh, okay, you're just a former foster care youth. But when you change it around to something strength-based, like alumni, like something that was a part of your life, it doesn't dictate everything, but it was a chapter in your life that you went through. You learned some things, you went through some things, and then from there you're moving on. So I don't want people to think that, okay, well, since you were in foster care, that's just, that's how I'm going to look at you. No, that's not, what I wanted to be looked at as, and just some respect with it as an alumni. Put some respect on my name and my experience. Yes.
Dignity. Yeah. It's
yes.
Well, and I that's why I like it so much, is because it's not, I think when you use the term foster kid or foster, it just seems like, you didn't have what the rest of everybody else had as far as a childhood. It's like, no, childhood is always formative years. It doesn't matter who you are or what your situation is. You're learning from every single day that you're a kid and beyond. Just like somebody who gets a degree had to take certain steps to get there. Same thing. Somebody who goes through that system learns, grows, and is, I think it's a good term to use. So you have definitely carried that alumni status now into advocacy role. And so it's clear it's not just something that you have as part of your life. It is something that you are making very much the centerpiece of your life. Where does that fall? Where does the book, and I think this goes to the next question, why did you make it? How does that book fall into place with your overall advocacy for current foster children?
Again, just showing an example of someone that is successful, a person of color that's successful, and that those youth who are in care or young adults who are in care can really say that they have someone that mirrors them, that looks like them. When I grew up in the foster care system, I didn't have any mentors or examples at that time who looked like me. We had the David Pelzer, and I was like, okay, his story is a bit extreme. I didn't experience that.
Right.
We would go to foster care conferences, and there weren't any people of color who were the keynote speakers or whose life I could relate to. So I felt detached. I felt like, whatever they accomplished, those were not my shared, dreams and visions for my life. So being relatable, in this situation for the population, and especially just looking through research at the disproportionate rates of youth in care who are youth of color, and looking at, what they've accomplished, if anything, after being in the foster care system. A lot of times we don't focus on the success rates after a certain age. So we know that this is a non-traditional population where they may not graduate high school at the age of 17 or 18, or where they may not graduate college at the age of 21. So I think that it's very important to know that there are still those who are successful and still those who are working on themselves towards whatever their definition of success is. So I think that this book reiterates that, I just turned 40 and there are a lot of things that I'm just now accomplishing. Although education was a big thing for me and I finished, my bachelor's degree at 21 and my master's degree at 23, a lot of things career-wise didn't happen for me until after the age of 30. Yeah. So just thinking about a lot of those things, and my family dynamic changed, things I learned about myself changed, my support system changed, and what I needed changed. What does support look like, for foster care alumni? My particular situation was my mother was always in active addiction. She never stopped, using, and how that affected me to see my mom deteriorate, to know that I was successful, but then I didn't have control over her life. And for her to make the specific changes I wanted her to make, in order for her to be successful the way I wanted her to be successful. Mm-hmm. So dealing with that, what does that look like? And who can I talk to about that? Because everybody may not understand, those different types of things, and the power of forgiveness. People say, well, how did you still have a relationship with your mom? And just as you stated earlier, Eric, everybody has a story. People don't just wake up and say, oh, I'm going to use drugs today and I'm going to lose my kids to foster care. Yeah. They don't do that. They're dealing with things that they may not have been able to overcome, or maybe didn't have the resources available to be able to address those situations. And that was particularly relevant for my mother's situation. And by the time that, she wanted to address those things, she felt like she was so far gone. So what do you do in those situations? Do you stop your life just because your parents didn't make the decisions that you wanted them to make and it didn't pan out the way you wanted it to pan out? Or do you move forward and break those generational curses and be, the light for others and provide hope and those different type of things, and be the example to know that things can be done, even if your situation is not ideal. So those are the things that I wanted to come through for the book and for others to relate to. Not that you had to be in foster care, but there's been a time when the majority of us have felt alone, or felt like we didn't have other people, or felt like a situation was impossible. But what was it in us that pushed us forward? Recognizing those things and knowing that it's normal to have down times, that it's normal to feel like you're having a defeated status at that moment. It's normal. But what are those things that pick you up? What are those things that make you move forward? So really recognizing those things too.
That's such a important thing to listen to and to hear. And do you think that I just got to sign this as we're running out of time. I thought I had the endless amount, so this will end in 10 minutes. Do you mind if I send you another Zoom right after?
Oh, not a problem.
So we can finish up. All
okay.
Right. But where it says, so how's it going with this? Do you think that your entire journey could have happened in any previous time period, or is this something that's specific to the time period that we live in? In other words, not only your experiences growing up, but also your ability to reach out to people through word, through book, through all these different medias, types. Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's specific to the present day, or would have been much trouble? It was, say 40 years ago, early 80s. Do you think this would have been possible for you to get this book out there?
Not in the 80s. I don't think that people were well aware of the foster care system the way we are now, and we have more freedom. So being able to utilize the media resources that we have and the outlets that we're able to get the message out. And I think, people are more comfortable now with sharing, as before it was like taboo. Nobody wanted to share if they were in foster care. And I was one of those people. I was embarrassed, as a youngster about my situation because of the questions that people asked me. And who wants to tell people that they're living with strangers? Who wants to tell people that their parents are, on drugs and things like that? And kids can be cruel, so I just think my time period, was ideal for, what I went through. And even the time right now, I think it's even more relevant now that I'm able to get the message out because I have more outlets to do so. And people are more open about their experiences through the foster care system.
I think the last question I can ask before we have to, reset everything is where was it made and what locations are associated with it? So you are native to Buffalo, New York.
Mm-hmm.
And I've visited Buffalo a few times, but do you think that your story is geographical? Is it specific to a place like Western New York? And I get teased by my students often because I'm obsessed with the Erie Canal. It's a marvel. I mean, it's amazing that they were able to make that, and the Erie Canal essentially created places like Syracuse but all those upstate New York cities
Mm-hmm.
are a result of the canal being built, connecting the Atlantic Ocean out to the middle of the country. And Buffalo grew in size and importance as a city because of that. I don't know if you knew this now, but Oswego and Buffalo used to be about the same size. They matched each other as far as the size and importance to trade. But it was when they knocked down the toll on the Erie Canal, which made it much more affordable to go all the way to Buffalo. That's when Oswego kind of plateaued and stopped growing altogether. And so Buffalo is, for Western New York, it's a big city. I mean, it's not a little place. Do you think that Buffalo factors into your story? Anything about the economy there or the socioeconomic statuses there?
Yes, I think the origin of my story is very important because Buffalo, as you know, we were an industrial city. We're the Queen City. And a lot of people migrated here from down south to work at Bethlehem Steel and all those different type of things. And when the industrial industry basically deflated, a lot of people were without jobs and things like that. And so what happens? Poverty stricken, a lot of things within the housing area, redlining, and all of these things, affected people of color, especially African Americans. And so the poverty level went up. And if you know anything about foster care in general, that's what is the major contribution to youth being in foster care due to poverty, abandonment, abuse, all of those different types of things. And Buffalo is one of the third most racist cities here in the US, to know that. So again, when we think about poverty levels, we think about people of color, and then we think about these systems that have been set into place that are supposed to assist with these different things. So I think my story as being, like I said, an Afro-Latina woman and thinking about poverty in connection to that is major, because a lot of people of color at that time in the 80s and 90s, that's when the crack epidemic came within the cities and depleted a lot of the neighborhoods, and jobs were not available. So the contribution to the socioeconomics of certain neighborhoods here in the city and different things that happen with the youth, now you see the results of it today.
I feel like I always should reformat my question template to put the geography question. I'm a big proponent, I guess, for lack of a better word, of saying geography, where you live, your specific place informs almost every other part of your life, everything from, the climate, the weather in places like Buffalo by comparison to other areas. And like you said, what it was eventually, what the basis for its economy. And when those things, when the factors of production, the economy and the labor force is without work, and then, things can fall very quickly from there. And, people get into desperate situations and then they don't have options in that way. It should be noted that references to foster care are nowhere to be found on the cover of Leah's book, including the title. Therefore, it is not just a guide for others who have been through that system at one time or another. It is meant to inspire people now and in the future who find themselves with obstacles and struggles. This says quite a bit about our contemporary culture, as you will hear as our conversation continues. So the next question that I have for you is, who is the intended audience or user of this? And you've touched on this a couple of times. As far as, either children who are currently in the foster system or people who are alumni of the system. It's interesting because, we're using the internet right now, so we can't downplay its importance, but it feels like nowadays everybody's like, well, if you need help, if you need resources, either call this phone number or go to this website or go to, there's something about a book that is much different from that. Is that your intended audience when you made this, is somebody to, not just see it as another thing to scroll past or to click on, but that you actually wanted them to hold it, read it, go back to pages if they wanted to? Is that why you went down this road for, that's your audience, right?
Yes. And also, just anybody who feels like they're an overcomer or who needs assistance with moving forward with any type of adversity that they're going through. Because just growing up without my parents, like, that's a hard thing, not really having someone to guide me on basic life things, life necessities, so how hard that was. And I was still able to navigate through life. But I also talk about the importance of the things that I did have, mentors, people who stepped in, when my parents could not, and even the significance of the relationship that I did have with my parents. Because although I grew up in the foster care system for 10 years of my life, I still had exposure, to my parents. And so for me, it just was a lesson of things that I didn't want to do or things I didn't want to be. But then also there were some lessons that I did learn. Like, my mom was a very strong advocate about education, so that was instilled in me at a young age. And then again, just knowing that everybody has a story and where my family of origin came from, like, how did things come to be or why was it like that? So just getting, the importance of that, and then knowing who I wanted to be as a mother, as a wife, as a person of power and influence within my community. But also, this isn't just for those who have gone through the foster care system, but for those who are in leadership, who work with these particular populations, who may not have access to them on a daily basis, but to make some really viable decisions to assist, knowing what this particular population goes through on a daily basis.
Would you, that's a very important thing too. The educational component of it, again, not to put down the internet, it has plenty of great information out there, but there's something just about a book. Books have, I remember talking to, I think it was actually when I lived in Oswego, I went to the historical society there, and I was chatting with the chief historian, and he was telling me that even some of the big museums in the country, and this is like 20 years ago, so it might not be true anymore, but they haven't digitized their collections. They still keep the same thing there. And he's like, the written word, the printed word still holds up. We shouldn't just put everything digital. There's something very powerful about the actual, because it takes much more senses to read a book. And so that's going to make you actually learn and understand much more than, watching a program on TV or sitting through somebody's PowerPoint or something like that. So I think that I'm glad that it is in book form and that the message is sent that way, and that it's not just, it goes back to what we were saying at the very beginning, that the choice of the cover is so important, because, and it doesn't mention the word foster on there at all. Right. So it's not just for, that population necessarily. It's, you are explaining your history, your personal history through that, so well. sorry, I'm looking out my window. There's a car that just, it's the mailman. I just got terrified. I was like, who is this? Sorry, another thing I need to edit out. So, that's such a, perfect cover for it, because it's not just saying, because like you said, how often do you see books in the same section of the bookstore with somebody's picture on it, like standing like this, and it's like, okay, that's fine, but this makes it that much more wider scoped as far as who it appeals to, and that's such a good thing. The last question, really, what ideas or behavior does this convey? We've touched on that quite a bit today.
Mm-hmm.
But do you feel that this message that you have is, and I'll go back to the timeline, not the geography this time, not the map, but in our present era, do you feel it's that much more important to get across that people
Yes.
are just, they feel lost, right? They feel hurt. They feel that there's something that they should be striving for.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what propels you?
Yes, because I think that going through the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of us, regardless of our socioeconomic status, regardless of our race, regardless of where we are in life, we all suffered during that time. Mm-hmm. We all felt a big hit, and
it's very traumatizing.
Very, very much so. And even here in the city of Buffalo, we had a massacre happen here, May 14th,
I know. Yeah.
And so seeing people just come together and again, feeling, that sense of fear that anything can happen, that none of us are protected, coming together, through trauma, through these different situations where we really have no control. How many times have any of us felt like that? How many times have we just seen life happen and felt like there was nothing we could do about it? And so I believe that connecting through those things, but then also connecting through our strengths, I'm going to go biblical on you for 1 second, but in the Bible, it says, Jesus says, where two or more are gathered in my name, then, these phenomenal or great things will happen. And that's what I believe. When we're separated, when we don't see or understand the phenomenons that other people go through, as far as like poverty, homelessness, hunger, all of these different things, the basic necessities, food, shelter, clothing, not having those particular things, which a lot of people experienced during the pandemic. Those were things that foster care youth were experiencing on that level before the pandemic even happened. So to correlate that and to say, when you don't have your basic necessities, how did you feel?
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah.
When the massacre happened and being in this predominantly African-American neighborhood where this person who came from a whole nother city,
a whole different
came
world,
in and violated this neighborhood where it was the elderly who were targeted, and African Americans. How many times have people felt in fear of their lives, that something may happen? Foster care youth feel this a lot of times. A lot of times if they run away and people don't look for them and they're in human sex trafficking, pools and different things like that, or they get involved with gangs and things like that because they want to feel a part of a family and feel protected, or things are happening within their foster home and nobody comes to do anything, so making those correlations that you don't particularly have to have some type of connection to the foster care system, but what about the feelings that these youth who are in care or young adults who are in care feel? Have you ever felt that before? And doing a lot of self-reflection. So I think that if we break down those barriers and we just think about a time when we felt those certain ways, then a lot of empathy begins to bring itself forth in compassion, and people really begin to have a soft spot in the sense where they say, what can I do to assist?
Yeah.
If I volunteer, if I become a mentor, if I'm able to donate, like knowing that we all have a responsibility, because these are the young people that we're leaving this world to, because we're not always going to be here, you know? So making sure that we just do our part. So I just think, again, relating to the sense of that, those feelings. Or I even had a person say to me one time, he was like, youth age out of foster care between the ages of 18 and 21. He was like, I didn't know anything about life then, but they're expected to be these adults and to make these life decisions. And I wouldn't have been able to do that. That's what he said. He said, I would not have been able to do that. And he said, I was still living with my parents. I didn't have life figured out. But this particular population, they're supposed to have it all figured out through the trauma, through everything they've gone through the lack of resources and support, and not having the appropriate toolkit to do these things. But the expectation is high, but what they were been given is low.
So, you mentioned a number of things that collectively we've all had traumatic experiences. And do you feel, though, in a strange way, that you're more equipped because you have already gone through so much before the rest of us have dealt with any kind of hardship or had to go without, or in the last couple of years, do you feel that much more not conceited, not like you're looking around like, oh, now the rest of you, but that you have almost like armor on, or a bit more on how to self-care and how to look for signs of trouble because you have this experience?
I would have to say I feel more prepared because while growing up and being in foster care, I had to make it work, so whatever situation I was going through, if I wanted to do better or be better, I had to figure things out, and so it allowed me to think outside of the box. It allowed me to utilize resources and look for resources that could assist me on my journey. And it allowed me to add things to my toolkit that maybe young adults my age hadn't experienced or hadn't even thought of yet. So I felt like, yes, I was more equipped, more prepared, and I was able to deal with certain things at a higher level than other people my age at that particular time. So
I guess once again, that term alumni makes sense.
Yes.
That, just like somebody that has a degree from a school and they apply for a job saying, look, I have this background, I have this experience and this education. Likewise, you can deal with traumatic experiences a bit better, or at least differently than, and, speaking before about the travesty back in May, it's almost like you're proving that there's more than one path for people who feel disconnected and isolated and angry, that it's if that's not addressed properly, terrible things happen. But if things like your words, your book, your speaking, all of those things, that's proof that it doesn't have to be that way, that there's so much more that you given some of your experiences, it's very conceivable that you could have gone down a very dark path.
Exactly.
But it seems that you have just, I don't know if it's your personality or just your natural, but that optimism and that hope and that, I think the title is just perfect. I shall not be moved, you will. And if you don't mind, just for, just a side note, I mean, where did the title come from? Did that right away, did that click like that's going to be the title of my book, or was it something that kind of came at the end of the process?
There was a song that I used to like, still like it to this day, but it was an old hymnal from church, and it said, I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. I shall not be moved. And so when I think of that title, I think of strength, that even though I went through hell, high storms, tornadoes, everything, trials, tribulations, that my roots were strong and my tree was still standing and I shall not be moved. So just really pressing forward and doing what needs to be done. And so it's just a book about strength and being an overcomer, but really being honest about those times when I didn't see myself moving forward, or I had those moments of weakness, or those moments when I just felt all alone. So just reiterating that, and that you can do it if you believe that you can do it, you know, and it may not be the the outline that you particularly put together, or or your thought about how you should get there, but you got there, you know. And so that's what I just wanted to reiterate. And Maya Angelou also has a book titled I Shall Not Be Moved. And so I just really think that title is just very strong, and it speaks to the content that I've written about within the book and my life story so far.
I'm so glad that you I'm not glad, I'll have to reword that. I like how much you use metaphors and symbology from nature. And that's something that from a historian standpoint is, and you mentioned before about history, your own personal history, your family history, or you're just, you know, history in general of the region, all that. It's a tree is a perfect explanation of why you should be aware of that history, you know, whether it be your own or, you know, just in general, because we here in the present, and I'm borrowing from a book called Timeline by Michael Crichton, but we here in the present, we are leaves at the end of a tree, right? And people who don't know history in any form just kind of ignore it and say, you know, whatever, that's for people that like, you know, old stuff. They are like leaves that don't know they're part of a tree. And a tree doesn't just have leaves and branches and a trunk. It also has those roots, right? And those roots are nourished by, you know, a number of different things. So whether it is in a large scale, like an entire country or continent, or even the whole globe, or an individual situation, everybody is a tree in a way, right? We are all part of a tree. We have our own, hence the term family tree, like I was mentioning before. Those are the roots, right? And so I think that's such a fitting and appropriate way of putting it, all this. And that's what I love about analyzing, right? Because, you know, anybody could just be like, yeah, this book, you know, it has a nice cover. But I mean, the book cover, the title, it says so much even before you open up the cover and start reading. So I can't thank you enough for joining the podcast. This is what Oswego Great Lakers do for each other, right?
Thank you for having me, Eric. I appreciate it.
This is so much. So what's the next step for the book? Are you doing any more tours to promote it, or is this where are we going next?
Yeah, so actually, if anyone wants to pre-order, you can pre-order at www.leahangeldaniel.com. That's my full name. Okay. And you will gain an autographed copy and a gift for my token of appreciation. And you'll have the book before the public actually has it. And then we have our national publishing date within October, where we'll be on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, and Books A Million online. I am also going to be on an author showcase for the Congressional Black Caucus, which will be held in Washington, D.C., which is a big deal.
That's great.
September 28th to September 30th. So I'm really excited, and I'm just looking forward to any other opportunities that are available just once the book launches. And I just hope that this book will be a blessing to many.
Well, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story and information about the book on my humble little podcast. But I think it's just perfect because, you know, everything is a primary source people are primary sources. And in this case, now we have several to deal with, including a book. The book's title, once again, is I Shall Not Be Moved. The author is Leah Angel Daniel. And I thank you so much for your time. And I wish you all the best with everything that you have, which is a lot. You got a lot going on, but it all has such great promise for the foreseeable future, I think.
Yes. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it.
All right. And for everybody else, make sure you tune in next time to the EPS podcast where everything's a primary source. In the meantime, you can look us up. I'm mainly on Instagram. That's the big one. But also there's a Facebook community, a YouTube page, all those social media outlets that you would find your podcast information on. And we'll talk to you next time.